Hey, what's up everybody? Justin here, and this week for my anime review, I wish to review a true classic, an anime that kicked off the 1990s, and that's Fushigi no Umi no Nadia, or Nadia Secret of the Blue Water, which was sort of like a breakout, hit for Gainax in the 90s. Of course, Gainax went out of business not too long ago, but of course it's, the studio that is home to Evangelion, and it was largely directed by Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi. Largely at first it was Anno's project, but partway through he had some mental health issues, and eventually he stepped down from the project and went to Shinji Higuchi instead. So pretty much, Nadia Secret of Blue Water has a very unique history of itself. So, back in the 70s, there was, anime fairy tale theater, where lots of old tales were being adapted into anime, or old classic stories, such as Anne of the Green Gables, Heidi, Dog of Flanders, and whatnot. And at one point, and these were largely directed by, let's say, the guys who founded Studio Ghibli, such as Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. And sorry. And at one point, they were going to do an adaptation to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And of course, they're going to, adopt, some certain plot points to it, original plot points, such as to be about a boy and a girl who were going to be, chased by evildoers, and then they meet Captain Nemo and join the crew of the Nautilus. But eventually that project didn't go through, and it was like in legal limbo for a while. But eventually that whole plot element that they thought of, with the boy and girl, would eventually be adapted to, Laputa, Castle in the Sky. But eventually NHK would have the rights to it. If you don't know what NHK is, they're pretty much like the Japanese equivalent to PBS in the US, or the BBC in the UK. So they contracted it out to, let's say, Gainax to make their own version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and that would evolve to Nadia, the Secret of Blue Water. And of course, some of these elements were original elements that Miyazaki conceived of, such as about the boy and the girl, would also be applied to this. So where does it fit in? So even though it's not, the credits do say it was inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, it does borrow, a lot of original elements from the original novel by Jules Verne. And it's about like how eventually the two main characters, John Paul and the titular Nadia, would eventually team up with Captain Nemo and join his crew. And together they would fight the evil forces, of this evil cult, who were apparently the descendants of Atlantis. And of course, part of that quest is to find the lost city of Atlantis. And of course, like in the original novel, it takes place it starts off in France towards the end of the 19th century, and a lot of those elements are still implemented. And knowing that, what was his name? Of course, at this time, with the prior generation of anime directors, they were influenced by World War II and whatnot, while the generation that came after were influenced by anime itself. Like, Anno was sort of the beginning of that, and of course, you will see that there's a lot of anime inspirations in Nadia Secret of Blue Water, especially with Macross and Yamato. And Yamato was one of Anno's favorite animes as a child, and I think he once said if he didn't, watch Yamato as a child, then he wouldn't become an anime director. So you'll see those elements later on in the series. So it's pretty much like, an action-adventure anime, and because the two main characters are children, John Paul and Nadia, there's a lot of comedy, set into it, and of course there's drama, there's tension, and with, what was his name? With Captain Nemo and his crew, there'll be plenty of action. So it kind of gets, an element of just about everything. And to a certain extent, the story is paced reasonably well, but towards, let's say, 2/3 into it, there will be an infamous arc that takes place on an island, and I think that's like where some of the problems began to arise, internally within Gainax. But even though this has always been something of, let's say, of an issue, it still remains to be a hit and still beloved to this day, by Japanese and non-Japanese fans alike. And if you've pretty much seen Evangelion, artistically, it uses the same character designs. Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, who was the character designer of Evangelion, he designed the characters of this one. And I believe there's even, a meme out there saying that pretty much that Shinji is a boy version of Nadia, except, Shinji is lighter skinned and whatnot. So, yeah, you're kind of going in, but of course it has more of a, say, more childish features with rounder designs and all that other stuff. And of course it's kind of like more exaggerated, more comedic with its designs compared to Evangelion, which is more serious and drama. And the music is very upbeat. You gotta love the opening theme song, "Blue Water" by Miho Morikawa. I know she also did the second theme song to History's Strongest Disciple Kenichi, and it's just like the opening theme song. It really captures the very essence and spirit of what this anime is about. So it's just like I would give this a perfect 10 out of 10 just for the theme song alone. And the rest of the soundtrack just does the job. And pretty much, you got a really good cast within the Japanese versions. I can't speak for the dubs because I don't watch dubs. For example, Nadia, she's played by Yoshino Takamori, and she is very famous as Aaron's mother from Attack on Titan, and she also played Sloth in Full Metal Alchemist, and she was also Trisha in the original Full Metal Alchemist as well. And of course I'm trying to remember what else she was. And she did a lot of voices for Sailor Moon, and she was also did a lot of voices for another very famous magical girl anime called Mahou Sally. And what's his name? Jean Paul. He is voiced by Norio Hidaka, most famous as the voice of Akane from Ranma 1/2, both the original and the remake. And she also voiced another Umukyo Takahashi character, Kikyo and Inuyasha. And she was also the original voice of Satsuki in Tonai no Totoro. And Captain Nemo, he's played by the legendary Akio Otsuka, who's very famous for doing lots and lots of roles. Like, he's the Japanese voice of Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid. And he also plays the detective in Ryuga Gotoku 7 and 8. And speaking of MGS, Raiden's Japanese voice actor, Kenyu Horiichi, he also voices Sensen, who is originally introduced as a rival, but eventually he becomes a good guy. And Kikuko Inoue, the voice of the boss in Metal Gear Solid 3, and also, the voice of Kasumi in Ranma 1/2. She does the voice of Medina in this series as well. So you pretty much got, every character, a lot of big name voice actors from the 80s and 90s and whatnot. So, of course, this anime was unfortunately, even though despite being a big hit, because they didn't really get a good deal, Gainax, they made little to no money on it. Any money they made was mostly based off the video game sales. The only video games I'm aware of the top of my head are the one for the Mega Drive and the PC Engine CD. But other than that, NHK, they made most of the money. And if you're a gaijin like me, we have enough reason to hate NHK already. This just adds more to the pile. And it's kind of funny that in Japan, the Japanese hate the NHK to the point there's actually a political party that's actually against the NHK. But So anyway, if you're looking for a true classic, and if you're a true fan of Jules Verne, despite its flaws, especially its in particular island art, I strongly recommend Fushigi no Umi no Nadia. And stay tuned for the next review.